You're about to enter a recording session where the lights are low, the tape is rolling, but where the truth is already starting to blur. The music begins to change shape, melody bending, voice breaking, something human turning theatrical, almost possessed. And in that moment, a man is born on tape who would never be quite the same again. Because what follows is not just a song, but a spell. And once spoken, there's no telling who's really in control anymore. Here, on Things Visible and Invisible. Steve Bergsman is an American journalist and non-fiction author known for writing biographies and cultural histories focused on entertainment, real estate, and American popular culture. He has worked extensively as a freelance writer and has contributed to various magazines, newspapers, and industry publications. His writing often explores unusual or overlooked figures in music and business history, combining investigative reporting with narrative biography. His works include I Put a Spell on You, The Bizarre Life of Screamin Jay Hawkins, and he joins me down the line from his home in Arizona. Steve, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Glad to be here.
Steve, when I first came across your work, I was fascinated by it, and of course I've heard of Screamin Jay Hawkins, but is there enough in his life for us to really spend a lot of time discussing it?
He's one of those obscure figures in music history, but he had a overwhelming, you might say, effect on the music starting in the 60s. He was, of course, a singer in the 1950s. That's when he first had his first hits. But it took a generation for people to see what he did and try to sort of do what he did back in the day. So, the whole sort of live show where it was a bit gothic, you might say, or a bit bizarre. And I'm talking about like where they dressed up like Kiss or the crazy world of Arthur Brown, where it was like a show almost. And the entertainers dressed up, looked different. That all started with Screamin Jay Hawkins back in the 1950s.
Absolutely, and we're going to get into all of that. I think we better start at the beginning, Steve, if we could. Before he became famous in the 1960s, we need to look a little bit at his origin story. Where was he born? What sort of world did he emerge from?
He was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and he was adopted. He knew who his mother was. It was just that his mother was very poor and overwhelmed, and she allowed him to go into a place nearby, actually, with a woman who became his surrogate mother, you might say. And the fact that she was overwhelmed, his real mother, and put Screamin Jay Hawkins elsewhere was something that grated on him his whole life, and he really never forgave his mother for, as he felt, abandoned.
Now, what year are we talking about his early childhood? What years?
So that would be in the 1940s.
So are we still talking about very much a segregated United States at this point?
We're talking about a very segregated United States. In America, we called it the Jim Crow years, but it was not a good time to be a Black American in America. The segregation was in full effect. And let's say you were a musician on the road in America, going from place to place. Well, you couldn't stay in a hotel anywhere. There were only certain hotels that catered to Black musicians. So you couldn't go into a restaurant, you couldn't go into a hotel. unless it accepted black musicians. So it was that kind of stringent segregation in America in the 1950s up until the mid 1960s.
Now, we're going to talk about Hawkins' interest in the occult and the occult imagery that he deployed in his various stage performances. But in his early life, was there any kind of influences of that nature? I'm thinking sort of voodoo or that sort of thing that was mediated through family members or the community that he was growing up in the 1940s.
No, no, actually, no. His interest was in music, and he actually trained to be a classical musician. But he enjoyed the blues music of the time, and Detroit had a very lively, you might say, downtown core, which was African American, and they had some of the best clubs in America for rhythm and blues, and that was his interest. He's How did he get into sort of the darker aspects of the entertainment industry? It was an evolution, actually, and
Well, we'll come to that.
sure.
I just with the chronology. So, I mean, was he? I mean, he went to high school, I guess. Was he a good student? I mean, he went on to train as a classical musician. So, was music his thing from the start? Was that the thing that he saw as his kind of calling in life?
It was. He also wanted to be a boxer, so he got drafted in the late 1940s, early 1950s. He was a boxer in the service. So those were his two interests, you might say, boxing and music. And he was in the music or entertainment part of the armed services, even though he would like to tell you different.
So he's musically gifted from an early age. I mean, was this also his route out of poverty? And was it? I mean, it's a well-worn path. I'm just wondering, was it something that he immediately saw that using whatever gifts he had was the means by which he would become something other than what he was given in life?
That was metaphorically yes, and literally yes as well. So when he got out of the service, uh, I'm sorry, I said he was in Detroit, but it was really it was Cleveland. I apologize. So when he got out of the service and he came back to Cleveland, uh, there was a disc jockey in the town named Alan Freed, and Alan would play the latest R&B, and it was really the only place to find R&B, not only in the Cleveland area, but the station was kind of a super station back then. They'd have these huge antennas, and you can pick up the AM radio pretty much all over the Northeast. So he came back to Cleveland. He went up to meet Alan Freed, and he couldn't believe Alan Freed was a white guy. He thought only a black DJ would play R&B music, but Alan Freed was playing what Alan Freed would eventually call rock and roll. So, and it was because of his meeting Alan Freed, and they got along, that Screamin Jay went to what is probably the first rock and roll concert ever. And one of the headlines was a guy named Tiny Grimes, first a jazz musician, then a blues musician. And he sometimes played sort of pre rock and roll music. Anyway, so Alan Freed's Moondog dance, it was so popular with teens that instead of 2 or 3 thousand, which was what the auditorium can sit, something like 20,000 teens showed up. And not only did we have the first rock and roll concert, we had the first rock and roll riot. But anyway, when Tiny Grimes left town, Screamin' Jay Hawkins went with him.
Wow. So it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood film, Steve. You know, that moment when somebody sees. Well, was it a case of him seeing that this is what he wanted to do, or was this the opportunity that something would come out of this?
Both. I should add that he got married when he came out of the service.
Right.
So when he went off with Tiny Grimes, he actually left his family behind. Now, here's an interesting story. Tiny Grimes had this group, and they would dress up in Irish garb. So, and then they would sing traditional Irish music with a rock beat, you might say, or a pre-rock beat, and that was their gimmick. So, and they had this raucous show, and they wore kilts and tams and they had this crazy show, and that's how Screamin' Jay Hawkins was first introduced to music that was also a kind of performance as well.
Yes, I see that straight away. I mean, was there? I mean, he just went on the road with Tiny Grimes. Then did he? I mean, did he literally just abandon his family and head off for fame and fortune?
Exactly. He abandoned his family. Technically, he was the chauffeur for Tiny Grimes, but he was also such a good musician that Tiny Grimes incorporated Screamin' Jay Hawkins into his group as well. Of course, he wasn't Screamin' Jay at that time, but he was on his way to be Screamin' Jay.
So what year are we talking when he sets off on this odyssey?
So this would have been, let me see, the concert, I believe, was 1952, but I'd have to look in my book here.
Yes.
to check that out.
Okay,
here's my promotion as well.
I mean, 1952 is still quite early in the history of rock and roll. I mean, were Tiny Grimes and Hawkins were they the kind of early promoters, the early zealots for the whole rock and roll movement?
They were absolutely. They had a sound that was absolutely pre-rock and roll. It was on the way to what we consider the rock and roll beat. Now, that concert that I talked about, there were two headliners. One was Tiny Grimes, and the other one was the Dominoes. They were a doo-wop group, and they had a sort of a ribald big hit, I think it was 1951, called 60-Minute Man. And 60-Minute Man, the core of that song was 15 minutes of pleasing, 15 minutes of teasing, 15 minutes of kissing, and then 15 minutes of blowing my top. So it was a pretty obvious song, you might say. So the Dominoes and Tiny Grimes headlined, and there to this day, there's a controversy of whether anybody ever got to sing because the police raided the concert and closed it down. So, but the Dominoes, and this is going to be a little promotion later on, but Dominoes were headed by a lead singer called Clyde McPhatter. And they had a song, Have Mercy Baby, that was a huge hit at the time. And between Have Mercy Baby and the progression of Tiny Grimes' music, we're talking about really pre-rock and roll here.
Okay. So he's on the road. How long does he spend with Tiny Grimes, and what happens next?
He was a very ambitious guy, Screamin' Jay Hawkins, and he eventually left Tiny Grimes and tried working with other musicians. And it didn't really work out for him, but he was in New York and he got to know a lot of people and a lot of musicians. And he tried his hands with some independent labels. And finally, he gets to a better label, you might say, and they want to record Screamin Jay and one of his songs, and that song is "I Put a Spell on You."
So what
So they
what
go into.
what year are we
Go on, I'm
talking?
sorry.
What year are we talking, Steve?
So we're talking about by now about 1954,
Okay.
55.
Yeah.
So he has kicked around a bit, but now it's time to be in the studio. And he gets in the studio and he gives a very tepid, ballady version of "I Put a Spell on You." And the producer's scratching his head and he's saying, "Well, this isn't really much." And they make no progress in the studio. So, so the producer says, okay, let's take a break here. Let's have some food, and I'll bring in a lot of alcohol, and we'll take a fun break. And what happens is they eat and they get drunk. The whole group in the studio gets drunk. And I should add that Tiny Grimes knew enough people that he had the backing musicians were all first class. They had Sam the Man Taylor and Big Al Sears, and most importantly, on the guitar was Mickey Baker, who was sort of the Eric Clapton of his time. If you wanted a first class guitarist in your recording session, you went to Mickey Baker. So they're all, but after about an hour, they're all blitzed and they can barely stand up, but they have to get back and sing this song. And Screamin Jay just gives this wild, crazy grunting and groaning and sort of haunting version of this song, "I Put a Spell on You." For some reason, he just got into sort of the moment when you think of "I Put a Spell on You," how bizarre that might be, but he got into the moment of like putting a spell out there and was all grunting and groaning and things he might have heard back when he was a child listening to music back in Cleveland.
So, I mean, it's got a sort of quasi supernatural theme to it, anyway. The song. Certainly, any performances that I've looked at are shot through with occult imagery, be they voodoo, be they skulls, this sort of thing. Where did this was this just showmanship, or did he have a particular interest in that sort of world, the esoteric?
I've never come across anything where he had a particular interest in, say, voodoo or magic or things like that. But his early songs all were on that theme, like Little Demon or things like that. So he stayed with that thing, and the whole feeling of "I put a spell on you," that whole sort of put somebody in a trance, etc. And a lot of his early songs were all on a similar theme. So it worked for him with "I Put a Spell on You," and he just continued with it. And then it eventually evolved where it became an act for him. So he would dress up in a sort of a bizarre look. He had a cane with a skull on it, and then he had a cane with a skull, smoking a cigarette, and that sort of became his act. But the real change, where we don't associate with it anymore. But when he started out, and rock and roll came in, and Alan Freed has moved from Cleveland to New York, and he's putting on shows, and he still had an affection for Screamin Jay, and he put him on his first show. And and Alan Freed thought about this, and he said, Jay, what if we had you come out of a coffin? and then you come out of the coffin and sing, "I put a spell on you." And Screamin say, "I'm not coming out of the coffin. I don't care. A black dude doesn't come out of a coffin." And Alan Freed said, "Well, I'll pay you more." And Jay says, "No, no, no." And Alan says, I'll make it a substantial payment for you if you do that in the act." And finally, um, Alan Freed offered him a couple of $100, which was a very big deal. That was a lot of money back then. And Screamin Jay said, "Sure, I'll do it." And he did. And it was so well greeted by the audience. They open up the coffin, he comes out, he sings, "I put a spell on you." And then he's forever associated with that. And for years, every time he performed, he had to do the coming out of the coffin act, and eventually got tired of it, but he couldn't let go anymore. Everybody expected that from him.
So, I mean, we're talking, I guess, late 50s America. There was enough pushback with the likes of Elvis and so on. I mean, you say that the audience were enjoying these kind of macabre tricks that he was playing on them. But were there any people who were objecting to this, saying that that this was not good for young people to be exposed to this? In the same way that maybe 10 or 12 years later, that rock groups that used certain occult imagery, the same kind of objections were raised.
Oh, of course. So when rock and roll first hit, parents in America, and then I suppose in the UK as well, were really sort of scared of this music. I mean, kids were getting up there and really dancing, and there was this whole fear of what we in the United States would say was juvenile delinquency, where kids would misbehave in groups and they'd stand with their leather jackets and smoke cigarettes and things like that. So there was a movement as soon as rock and roll hit by parents to clean up the music on radio stations. And one of the first songs to feel this was "I Put a Spell on You." So the song was actually banned on a number of stations. And then they tried to ban, these same groups would try to ban other songs that they felt were too sexual or too gross, you might say. I mean, if you hear the original "I Put a Spell on You," it is, to this day, a very weird and song.
Well, I was thinking that it's a very weird song, Steve, and the whole stage act just adds to the weirdness. But then to have somebody coming out of a coffin, sometimes brandishing a skull or something. I mean, surely were local authorities not being asked, the local sheriffs not being asked to step in and stop this type of thing?
The shows were not, that I know of. The sheriffs didn't come in and arrest Screamin Jay for putting on such a weird performance. It was really on the mass media. He did one of the early Alan Freed movies. So Alan Freed promoted the verbiage rock and roll, and then it was adopted by everybody everywhere, the term rock and roll. And he wanted to show that these singers at the time weren't dangerous to America. So he sort of created these teen movies. And in one of the first ones, he invites Screamin Jay Hawkins. And it's kind of weird because whether it's Chuck Berry or somebody else, everybody had to appear in an Alan Freed movie, very clean cut and acceptable to parents. And then in that first movie, Screamin Jay comes out in some sort of bizarre outfit that I don't know, if everybody wanted to appear as a cleaned up act, he would have looked normal, but he just came out looking as bizarre as possible. So then it became tough to really place Alan Screamin Jay anywhere, because there was this whole, after the first wave of great rock and roll pioneers, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. Then we got into a whole period where corporate America took over the music business, the rock and roll business, I should say. And then we had acts like Frankie Avalon and Fabian and Bobby Rydell, instead of the wild acts, the wild Little Richard acts, or the Screamin Jay Hawkins act. So eventually, those people who wanted a calmer rock and roll got what they wished for.
And was that so? Was Hawkins' career relatively short, or his not his career so much, but his moment in the limelight, was it relatively short then?
It was very short. He really had that one song, and even when he had like some of the best writers in America, Lieber and Stoller, who wrote Hound Dog, and they tried to write something for him, and it didn't work out. But the problem with Screamin Jay himself, he had a lot of issues, and he was often an angry fellow, and he just wouldn't cooperate with people. And then when you wanted something really calm and suave from him, you'd get a song like Armpit Number 6 or something like that. So he'd never give you what you wanted. So he always made problems for himself. He often got into, as his career melted down and he was doing second rate clubs, he would always fight with the other performers because he wanted to be the closing act. So he never really helped himself along the way.
And are we talking about the 1960s then, effectively, or towards the end of the 60s? His career was sort of petering out in these clubs.
His career was definitely petering out in these clubs, and I don't know what to say. He was stuck. He was still dressing up, sort of in a bazaar. He still had the cane and the skull on top of the cane, and he still was coming out of a coffin. But he would sort of amplify his old act. He'd have smoke and things like this. But that was the only thing that really sustained him. Is that people were curious to see him, because he only had that one song. And then in the 60s, Nina Simone took that song, reworked the whole thing, and made it a ballad. And it was a huge song, not in the US, but in the UK. It was the reworking of I Put a Spell on You as a ballad. Changed the whole feel for it. So even his song had gotten away from him.
And just remind me, Steve, did he actually write I Put a Spell on You? Did he have the...
He wrote the song. That was his song, yes.
So presumably, even though Nina Simone had reworked it, he would have been entitled to quite a hefty chunk of royalties at some point.
At some point, he always had money problems throughout his life, and at some point he sold the rights to it, to the song, so somebody else was reaping those rewards. He was also he had a spell in jail for having sexual relations with a 14-year-old. So he did just about anything he could to kill his career.
Yeah. So looking at it now, you've researched his life, you've written about it, Steve. I mean, the macabre, the voodoo imagery, just stage performance, nothing more?
I can't say he lived that life, but it became important to him, and it just kept creeping more and more into his act. But eventually, the demon songs and uh, the witchery kind of songs. They also began to peter out as he would just do sort of songs that would offend people, you might say. Uh, like he had songs like "Sitting on a Toilet" where he was constipated. That was a famous song of his. People still listen to that song, though it's hard to listen to.
Yeah, I imagine. So, so he had some fame in the late 50s. His career sort of dribbled away from him in the 60s, 70s. I think you mentioned to me that he had had sort of some film credits in the 1980s. But what year did he die?
He died in the year 2000.
Right. And
So
did he die in relative obscurity, or was he still working the clubs? Was he still trying to be a star?
his last concert was in 1999. So I got to review here a few things. So he was married 6 times,
Right.
and he sort of he had one long marriage. He was his first wife, and then he got married again, but he never really divorced his first wife. So in effect, he was a bigamist. Then he was with the second wife a long time, and she left him. And then he had a couple of short marriages, and then he married a French woman, and of course he moved to France, and then she divorced him, and he married a woman who was an immigrant from Africa, and she was very strong into sort of the African religions, the local religions, not Catholicism or anything like that. And so he ended up back where he started. Now, the other thing about being married 6 times, plus he was considered a Lothario, you might say, in his heyday. And there was a short documentary in the UK about Screamin Jay Hawkins. This was maybe 30 years ago, where they claimed he had like 50 children or something like that. So, but I went back and looked, and I said, there's no way he could have had 50 children, and even if he played around every night. So, but there was this little documentary. They said as much as I think in this documentary, he had 80 children or 78 children. The number was outstanding, but not true.
Well, there's a lot about Screamin Jay Hawkins, which doesn't appear to be true. Steve, as no doubt your book, it's a colourful life. It's a strange life. It's a life which has which borders the occult. I'm not sure how much of it is belonging to the occult, but you've done a very good job in resurrecting this obscure figure and making him live once more. But unfortunately, Steve, we've come to the end of our time together. Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of your book.
So I've written about 20 books on the life of musicians, and my focus is really on musicians that I thought were important to the history of pop music. And it all really began with Screamin Jay Hawkins. I feel he was forgotten, but should be remembered. And my most recent book, which came out this year, was on a R&B singer named Clyde McFadder, who I was even more important to the history of rock and roll than Screamin Jay Hawkins. And he is, in fact, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. Once for being the founder of the Drifters, and secondly for a successful solo career. So you can find almost everything I wrote on Amazon, and I hope everybody sort of finds Screamin Jay Hawkins, because some of those strange, eerie, occult-like songs are still fun to hear 50, 60, 70 years later.
Absolutely. For now, though, Steve, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.